You know what? I'm excited about this. I have my book, my copy, my highlighted
Yay.
copy right in front of me. But you have been everywhere lately talking about something that I feel like people are finally talking about, and that is age, but in particular, super age, is what you call it. Because when you look around at the population and what we're seeing, it is a super age, and I feel like it's a super age to be right now.
Yeah, it is. I mean, we're in, in many respects the golden era of our civilization. It might not seem that way from day to day, but more children than ever survive into adulthood, and more people are living long, healthy, fulfilling lives. We still have plenty to do. There's always room for
Yes.
improvement. But this new era is one that's really exciting and one that we should lean into.
Well, so let's define super age first of all for people
Sure.
who may not heard of the book or read the book, because I think the numbers are staggering
Yeah.
when you look at populations and you see how many people are first over the age of 50, right? So start there, but in admitting it, and then over the age of 65.
Sure. The numbers are just exploding. The 65 number is the one that I like to focus on because it's that quote unquote traditional retirement age, that time when people tend to stop working. By the end of this decade, we can expect that 1 out of 5 Americans will be over the age of 65. And just a few years after that, 3 or 4 years tops, there'll be more people over 65 than under 18. So we're
Wow.
really changing the entire face of the country quite quickly. And Tamsin, it's important to note that you're in New York, I'm in Washington, D.C.
Yeah.
Our cities are relatively young places. When you go out into
Right.
the countryside, into the rural landscape and the rural counties, they're actually a lot older than the cities are. So you'll find places, in the Midwest and the far West where the population of over 65s is 30, 40% of the population. It's really quite staggering.
I mean, I feel like there's so many areas to address, and you do it so incredibly well in your book. But one of the big ones is a workplace, because that is where people spend a majority of their time.
Mhm.
And you've got people that feel like they're being aged out, not necessarily aging into workplaces,
Sure.
feeling like they're not seen so much, not visible, not sure really what's next for them, and a lot of times can be struggling to feel like they need to keep up, with younger people. And I don't think that's necessarily the case. I appreciate this intergenerational working together and seeing what both groups and demographics bring to the workplace. I think it's pretty fascinating.
Yeah, we've had 300,000 years of civilization, whether it was, that hunter-gatherer period or actually moving together into cities and communities. But we've always worked together as generations, hand in hand. It was really only the past 100 years or so that we broke from that tradition and allowed this period of quote unquote retirement to emerge. Retirement is a construct. It is something that was hoisted upon us in an altruistic way. Make no mistake about that. It was thought at the time to be a good idea, but what it turned into was a very bad idea very quickly, because it gave corporations cover to push older people out of the workforce. And then this kind of nefarious ageism crept in. And we've always had an issue with older populations. How do we engage them? Are they something we like? Are they something we dislike? Are they valued? Are they not valued? But we're moving out of this kind of nefarious period of ageism again and moving back to a positive one. During the last jobs report in September, all of the growth in hiring are people over the age of 45. That is a
Wow.
change. That
That's
is a
incredible.
change in how we hire. And for the foreseeable future, we can expect that the older populations, they're actually going to be the populations that are growing in the workforce, not shrinking. It's those 16 to 24s, believe it or not, that are actually going to contract by about 7.5 or 8% by the end of this
Right.
decade. But almost every other group is going to grow.
So what do you do if you're older in the workplace? Because I still think, a lot of people go in there feeling, they're going to hit this time that they're supposed to retire, or I don't know. I guess a lot of people don't have the choice of whether or not they can or they can't, but they feel like this pressure that, their best years are behind them. So what advice do you give to somebody that's in that place that says, gosh, I've got to work longer, or I want to work longer, but I'm just kind of feeling like, maybe I'm not the strength at the company anymore. Maybe
Yeah.
I'm, on my way out in terms of the eyes of my employer.
Yeah, well, Tamsen, life's a marathon. It's not a sprint. And I think that if people think that their best days are behind them, they're sorely mistaken, and
Amen.
they're actually doing themselves a disservice. In fact, success is actually largely correlated to age. The longer we're around, the greater experience we have, the more value we bring to the table. But there are some things that we really need to do. Carrie Hannon, who's a great friend of mine, author of a number of books on getting a job when you're older, talks about staying relevant in the workplace. Like, we don't get to break from the reality that we need to look up, we need to look good when we show up at the office place.
Yep.
We need to stay sharp on our skills. We need to constantly remain curious and active and raising our hands. I'll do that. I'll get into this. But we also need to know that, especially near the end of our term, as we define it, there is some license now. There is some opportunity for us to have frank conversations with our employers about transitioning out and transitioning through flexible work arrangements. It's really a great deal for a business, and it's a great
Yeah,
deal
I
for
think
the
so too.
individual as well, because it allows you to pass on your knowledge, but also retain your position within a place. It really has something magical to it when it's done right.
Well, I think so too, and it magical in terms of your mind, just in terms of feeling like you're still part of things, and you're not going from 5 days a week to zero. And I know that my dad did that when he retired, so he was very hesitant to retire, and he didn't retire up until his mid 70s, because he was determined to he loved what he did every day and didn't want to sit at home and wasn't sure what was really next. We've talked a bit in the past, you and I. We met at a luncheon, actually, a mutual friend of ours, Michael Clinton, who wrote the book Roar. And, I think you and I just connected, or I felt like we just connected instantly, because I thought, oh my gosh, he has so much knowledge about this. Because what you talk about applies to everybody. People have to start thinking about this, not when you're rounding, 45, 50 years old, 60 years old. Like, I think you want to start thinking about that early and figuring out how you can stretch out longer
Yeah.
versus just pack a whole lot into these earlier years, right?
Yeah, you wanna think about, like I said, life is a marathon, not a sprint. Another analogy is taking a boat out to sail. You've got to tack your sails throughout the life course to meet these long-term goals. Our brains are not built for thinking long-term. They just aren't. So think about the things that make you feel good in the short term, that help you get to those short-term goals, because there is a multiplier effect that happens when you make the right decisions. Keeping friends, staying socially connected, exercising, eating the right stuff, maintaining your skills in the workplace. These things all add up. Putting a little money aside here and there really adds up to those longer term goals. And you have to think, and I know this is scary to people, that 30-year work life is largely gone. You can expect to work for the majority of your living years now. 40, 50-year careers will be the norm very shortly. And that's just what's coming. In some cases, it's already here.
Yeah. It's funny. I was really sad. A friend of mine, I talked to her the other day. She said to me, it's just that after a certain age, you just start feeling invisible, like you're not seen anymore. And I said, what are you talking about? Because I guess I'm looking at so many incredible, inspiring stories of people that have started second businesses. And we know a lot of them. They've decided that that's when they're going to write their book. They're going to travel the world, start running, whatever it is they're going to do. I feel like that I'm seeing more and more examples, forget 50, 60, 70, 80 years old, of these incredible stories that make me feel excited. Not always my skin excited, but excited to age. I'm excited to be able to be in that kind of free zone where you feel like this is your someday. You better start living it.
Yeah, there's a lot of demons that creep in.
Yeah.
Internalized ageism really sinks in at times. Real ageism exists, don't get me wrong, but that internalized ageism, how we feel about ourselves, can really be that demon that holds us back. And you got to fight that. You got to fight that at
Yeah.
every turn. These changes that are happening to you, those wrinkles you see on your face, those hormonal changes that are happening in your body, like, those are part of the deal. That's part of
Yeah.
life. That in no way really disrupts your brain and that computing power that you have up there to be creative and active and engaged, be an entrepreneur, be a part of an enterprise. Like, those are gifts that come over time. they just might feel weird. They might feel different. I like to say, in many ways, we're in a sense, in a perpetual adolescence because we're always
I
growing
like
up.
that better.
We're always growing up. Well, adolescence is one of those funny terms. We just
Yeah.
assigned it at the beginning of the last century to young people, and we said,
Yeah.
well, you grow up, you ripen into adulthood, and that's it. I haven't stopped ripening yet. I keep learning. I keep growing. I'm 45 years old. And I know some people say, well, you're right in the middle. That's a great time to live. Um, your 40s, people who are in their 40s are some of the most unhappiest people in the country,
Yeah. They're
statistically.
petrified. They're
Petrified.
petrified of what's next. I
Yeah.
like the word ripening because that just it's very true. It's very, very true. So you mentioned another word that made me go ding ding ding, hormones.
Yeah.
And because I've been all too familiar with them. Never did
Yeah.
I think in my 40s I'd be talking about hormones in my 50s, but yet here we are, Bradley.
Yeah.
Listen, it is the thing. It's a thing in the workplace and it's finally being talked about. And I have said this a couple of different times. I've been on television for decades now, and I never said the word menopause. I've said hormones, and I've said, but probably said period, and I probably said a lot of other things. But I never said hormones, and menopause, and I never talked about it.
Yeah.
And now it seems to be all I talk about, but it's relevant for a number of different reasons, not just the health and in the wellness and the emotional toll that it takes, but in the workplace, it's a real thing. It is a real thing. And it's very frightening for women themselves to first admit, this is happening or figuring it out. But second, to go into a boss and say, hey, here's where I am and I might need a day or I might need a room to go feel cooler in. So what do women do? I mean, I know some of the things that I'm trying to do within my own workplace, but for women out there listening, like going to work and in this area, in this time of life and in this transition, how do you add those two things together?
I certainly can't speak from the female perspective. I wouldn't dare take that license,
No.
but I do think what we have is a very unique reality here. Women have only really been in the workforce en masse for about 30 years, 40 years, if we're really being honest with ourselves here. That means we're going against, 10,000 years of civilization, that curve of what women used to do and what they didn't do. And a lot of our beliefs that we hold today, even about menopause, were forged long ago. And they're kind of central to our belief structure. So we're fighting against a belief structure that says when menopause happens, it's something that's bad. It's something that's going to hold you back. In fact, the earliest utterances of aging in women actually come from medieval texts. And a lot of the language that's used in these texts sounds a lot like how we describe menopause today, or women in that perimenopause period. Erratic, threat to the community, prone to temper, fevers. Yeah, it's crazy to see these things actually written down nearly 1,000 years ago.
I had no idea. That's
Oh
fascinating.
yeah,
I had no idea.
And it sticks. That stuff
Sure.
sticks in our brain, and it's something that we teach ourselves whether we want to or not. And then that blends into the workplace, and it creates this fear that if I'm going through this change, I've lost the ability to carry children. And our society revolves around people having children, whether we like to admit it or not. So I'm losing that value that I have, despite the fact that I have a stellar career. So that's scary. That's scary. And people have to realize that it's not something to be afraid of anymore. We have never had this many women in the workplace over the age of 45. It's never happened before. With that in mind, all of a new reality is coming. So if you want to go kind of apples to apples here, think about when the first wave of women came into the workplace. What happened? Businesses started to think, how do we accommodate, how do we make sure that women are getting the support they need? They put in lactating rooms. They offered maternity leave. All of this stuff became normalized in the workplace.
Yeah.
And in fact, can you imagine beating a company today, a good standing company that doesn't have a benefits policy that for women who are having children? No, it's insane.
Unheard of.
So
It would be unheard of.
it's unheard of. So that's where we're headed with menopause. It's just going to take some time. You can't just, snap your fingers and erase thousands of years of history. It will be incremental, the change. But the good news is, and this is the great news, Tamsen, this is the headline of the day, there are big companies overseas that have already realized that losing women over 45 in the workplace is a clear and present threat to their business operations and efficiency, and they are making really, really forward-thinking change within their policy structure, within their benefit structure, whatever we want to call it, to accommodate, to really meet women where they are, and keep them in the workplace for as long as possible because it's good for business.
Well, and that's what they're going to hear, right? At the end of the day, if there's nothing else, if they don't know someone going through it, if they're not sure, if they're not even familiar with really what menopause means and when it hits and how long, how it affects, they might not be able to rattle off the symptoms, but if they hear that it affects the bottom line, that causes a shift and that causes a change. I'm curious, what do you think? And I've tried to think about this myself because you talk about all the other policies that are in place right now for women to accommodate them. I've looked at the Channel 4 policy, the policy in the UK. That's the big media company in the UK, and they have been so forward thinking in terms of putting together a menopause policy in the workplace. What do you think that we can do to make employers start to normalize that? So start to feel like, oh, I'm not special because I did it. I did it because it has to be done. I mean, I think they put cooling rooms in, they can, let women ask for fans at the desk, but then it becomes a little bit more, it's a little bit more mental too. At some points there's a brain fog that kicks in where you can't even pull words out of your mouth. So I'm just wondering if there's different things that companies, if they're out there listening, say like the lift is not so hard. There are just a few key things that you can do that can help start this process moving forward.
I think if any business leader has their druthers, they have a sense of the history of business. And the forward march of business has always been one of inclusion, whether it was race or gender identity. We think about the operations in the workplace. We have to survive. We have to be inclusive in our environments and how we design them, including the benefits packages. If we want to retain employees, if we want to build for the future. In this period of superage, the average age of the country gets older. The average age of the workforce gets older. What's often missed, though, in this discussion is the birth rates have changed, too. So there are just going to be fewer people in the coming years. The United States will continue to grow, but parts of this country are contracting. Deaths outpace births. So businesses will need to think differently about how they recruit and retain workers. And the large swath of benefits that are offered to employees will need to include menopausal benefits. It's just going to be a reality for business. I think there's a lot to allyship. I think that the current menopause movement is very women-focused, women-led. I think that women need to bring more men into the conversation because men don't understand it. If you think, as you said, at 40, when you were in your 40s, you never thought that you'd be talking about this in your 50s.
Yeah.
Well, men never thought they'd be talking about this, period.
So true.
And men, even in their home lives, I think, tend to avoid this. So bringing men along to this, I think, is a really important part of it. I talked about this in front of 30 of the largest companies, their chief benefits officers in April of this year. And during the conversation, I mentioned the Channel 4 benefit. And this one benefits officer, a man from a very large company in America, laughed and he said, "Oh, come on, do we really need a menopause benefit?" And I saw every woman in the room shoot daggers through this man's body. And they said, "You clearly have no idea what menopause is." And they didn't. So we have, in engaging this subject and engaging business leaders in particular, there's the pragmatism of the bottom line, but there's that empathetic point of view too. Like, imagine if this were happening to you.
Yeah.
Imagine if you had.
And we're learning still. It's education. We're, as women, educating ourselves as to the symptoms and what happens. Well, that's exciting to hear. I love that somebody stood up and said that, though, because that voice, the 29 other men might have thought the same thing in that room. And so thank goodness that, went out there because they need to understand, what exactly that is.
Yeah. And it's something that I will never experience. It's just because of my gender. I will never experience it. Yeah. But with that,
you're not missing anything, Bradley.
Well, I appreciate that. But it is with that I know that I have to have a degree of empathy and I have to have a degree of understanding and ability to listen. I am agnostic though when it comes at the end of the day to whether or not somebody feels good about something.
Sure.
I look at this strictly through the economic lens, and I'm going to
Right.
tell businesses right now, if you don't get on board with this quick, you're going to lose your female workforce because there will be other businesses that are going to be competing for them. Our labor force is in a period of contraction right now. We are going to have to find people to work that are older than we would have expected just a few years ago. And they will come with a different set of realities. They may not be having babies,
Right.
but they are going to have other needs. And you have to
Yeah.
meet them where they are.
Yeah. Oh, it's so great to hear you say that. I could keep talking to you about this forever. The Superage, if you have not picked it up, go pick it up. I just love this because I feel like it's so chock full with, just facts that we can use forever. Really is what it's about. And it's all, I think what it also does is really, allows us to be okay with where we are, and that we are part of a golden age, and what's happening next is super exciting to see, and I can't wait. If somebody's out there and is feeling like, oh gosh, aging, I just don't, I guess I just want to say, like, do you have some parting words for them to just feel good about it, because it doesn't end, there's no end point there anymore. It just, I
No,
feel like it gets better. These stories are great out there.
I think life every year for me at least gets better and better and better. And there are always going to be ups and downs. That's part of the deal. Almost always going to hit a period of decline.
Sure.
The real decline tends to happen at the very end.
Right.
There's so much life to live. There's so much people can contribute, but they have to want to do that.
Yeah.
We live in a world where you have to show your value, and you have to show your value on a regular basis. That means you can't stop just because you think you look old, you think you act old, you think you've let your skills atrophy. Take some license, dig in again, find a new place, whether it's in your office or in your life, and lean into it, because you got a lot more years to get through, whether you like
I
it or
love it.
not.